Chapter 25, Fluid Balance, Screencast 6. This is the last of 6 screencasts for fluid balance in Chapter 25, and it is primarily focusing on hormonal control of fluid balance. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the actual formation of angiotensin II. This quite often will be referred to as the renin-angiotensin pathway. Remember, renin will be released from the Golgi apparatus, and things that will cause the release of renin will be low blood pressure or sympathetic stimulation. Now, renin and ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme, will actually cause the formation of angiotensin II, which is an active form. Now, if we look at the actions of angiotensin II, the impact on blood vessels is vasoconstriction, so it is a very potent vasoconstrictor and will work in increasing blood pressure in that particular manner. On the kidneys, it directly decreases urine output, so it helps maintain blood volume and blood pressure. The thirst center, so it actually stimulates the thirst center within the hypothalamus. When there's an increase in fluid intake, that will increase blood volume and blood pressure. It also will have an impact on the hypothalamus and the adrenal cortex. It stimulates to activate the posterior pituitary to release ADH, and it also stimulates the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. Now, here is an image of the renin-angiotensin pathway, and I actually want to walk through this whole process because I think it really is important that we understand this. The stimulus to activate the renin-angiotensin system is low blood pressure, and that would be detected by the Golgi apparatus, or the sympathetic division directly stimulating the Golgi apparatus. The receptor and control center are both the Golgi apparatus. And now let's kind of take a look at how we actually get to angiotensin II. Circulating within our blood is something known as angiotensinogen. This is a plasma protein produced by the liver, and it is an inactive hormone. Remember, the GEN ending, when we see that, indicates a substance that is inactive. Now, in the presence of renin, angiotensinogen will be converted into angiotensin I. This is still inactive. Angiotensin I, in the presence of ACE converting enzyme, or ACE, will actually convert angiotensin I to angiotensin II, and that is the active form. As noted in the previous slide, please be comfortable with all of the effectors and the actions. We know that it is a very potent vasoconstrictor, so it increases peripheral resistance, which will have a direct impact on blood pressure and cause it to increase. It has a direct impact on kidney function. It will decrease glomerular filtration rate, so this results in a lower urine output to help maintain blood volume and blood pressure. Two things are happening within the hypothalamus. Angiotensin II directly activates the thirst center, so it will result in an increase in fluid intake, resulting in a greater blood volume and blood pressure. It also will stimulate the release of ADH from the posterior pituitary. This directly decreases urine output to maintain blood volume and blood pressure, and it also will trigger the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. And aldosterone will decrease urine output to maintain blood volume and blood pressure. And we'll talk a little bit more about aldosterone and ADH. Now, ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, that is released from the posterior pituitary in response to nerve signals from the hypothalamus. Remember that this is a hormone that is produced within the hypothalamus, but stored and released from the posterior pituitary. Now, when we look at the stimuli that actually cause the release of ADH, it's important to remember that the primary stimulus is an increase in plasma solute concentration, and this will be detected by osmoreceptors within the hypothalamus. Now, low blood pressure will also result in the formation of angiotensin II. This binds to the hypothalamus and results in the release of ADH. In response to low blood pressure, baroreceptors within the heart will stimulate the hypothalamus, and this will be critical if there is severe blood loss. Now, one of the things that's going to happen, by ADH is stimulation of the thirst center. So fluid intake increases blood volume and pressure. It will decrease plasma solute concentration. If we look at increased water reabsorption within the kidneys, it's going to stimulate the principal cells to increase the number of aquaporins. This will decrease fluid loss within the urine and decrease blood osmolarity or plasma solute concentration. As noted, it also will cause vasoconstriction, but not as potent a vasoconstrictor as angiotensin II. Here we see basically the stimuli for angiotensin II, resulting in the release of ADH, low blood volume, and also an increased plasma solute concentration. And remember, that's the primary impact. The receptors and control center reside within the hypothalamus. And remember, ADH is a water-soluble hormone. And if we look at what it does, one of the targets is the hypothalamus, where it will activate the thirst center. When fluid intake occurs, it results in an increase in blood volume and blood pressure. Within the nephron, particularly the distal end, and within the principal cells, it will increase the number of aquaporins. Remember, ADH is a water-soluble hormone, and it's going to work with proteins that are already there, hence the aquaporins found within the principal cell. Then more water will be reabsorbed into the blood. This decreases the fluid loss in kidneys to maintain blood volume and blood pressure and decreases plasma solute concentration. And we also know that it does have an impact on blood vessels and acts as a vasoconstrictor, but not as potent a vasoconstrictor as angiotensin II. If we look at a condition known as diabetes insipidus, it is important to realize that not all diabetes are related to the regulation of blood glucose. So let's keep in mind diabetes mellitus, that is when we have hyperglycemia. Diabetes insipidus, on the other hand, is due to hyposecretion of ADH or an inability of the kidneys to actually respond to ADH. This results in a decrease in fluid retention and a very significant input in the production of urine, and individuals can lose up to 20 liters of fluid daily when they suffer from this condition. Now, aldosterone, this is a steroid hormone, and it's going to be released from the adrenal cortex in response to angiotensin II, decreased blood plasma sodium levels, or an increased level of potassium within the blood. As ADH, it binds to receptors within the principal cells of the kidney. Remember, this is a lipid-soluble hormone and is responsible for increasing the number of sodium-potassium pumps and sodium channels. This results in an increase in the reabsorption of sodium and water. Remember, water will follow the solute as sodium is being reabsorbed, and also an increased secretion of potassium. It will decrease urine output and maintains plasma solute concentration. When blood volume, blood pressure, and both sodium and potassium are back to normal, there will be a decrease in the release of aldosterone. So here we actually see the figure demonstrating the action of aldosterone. If we look at the stimuli, angiotensin II produced with a decrease in blood pressure. Also, when we see an increase in potassium levels, or if we look at low levels of sodium. Remember, it is due to sodium reabsorption is the primary function here. The receptor will be the adrenal cortex, and the adrenal cortex will actually act as the control center and release aldosterone into the blood. Remember, we are looking at a lipid-soluble hormone, so it must be attached to a plasma protein so it can move within the blood. If we look at the effectors, with the kidneys, we're going to see increased potassium secretion into the tubular fluid. Remember, hydrogen ion is substituted for potassium in conditions of low pH. And we also can see what's happening within the principal cells. It will increase the insertion due to the increased production of sodium-potassium pumps and also sodium channels, and with the increased sodium and water reabsorption into the blood. So the net effect is blood plasma sodium is maintained, blood plasma potassium decreases, blood volume and blood pressure are maintained by a decrease in urine output. This leaves us with the last hormone, and remember, we are now talking about atrial natriuretic peptide, and this is the only hormone we have that plays a role when there is an increase in blood pressure. So this is a peptide hormone that's released from the atria in response to stretch. This is usually due to an increase in blood volume, but also an increase in pressure. ANP decreases blood volume and pressure by binding to target organs. It will dilate systemic vessels, the vasodilation of afferent arterioles in the kidney, and also relaxes mesangial cells, and that both increases glomerular filtration rate and the output of urine. It will inhibit sodium and water reabsorption within the nephron tubule, so this will actually increase urine output, decrease blood volume and blood pressure, and keep in mind it basically will inhibit the renin-angiotensin pathway. So by doing that, it inhibits the release of renin, ADH, and the action of aldosterone. Here, once again, we see this figure, and notice the stimulus will be increased blood volume, and that is going to be detected by increased stretch of the baroreceptors within the atria, typically due to an increase in blood volume. The atria respond to the stimuli and release ANP within the blood. ANP will basically result in vasodilation, so this decreases peripheral resistance and blood pressure. It will increase glomerular filtration rate, and this increases urine output to decrease blood volume and blood pressure. We're going to see an increased loss of sodium and water in the urine, so we increase urine output to decrease blood volume and blood pressure. And we're also going to see the decreased release of renin, and this basically will interfere with the action of angiotensin II, decreased release of aldosterone, and ADH. The net effect of ANP is blood pressure to decrease.